This is AP Lit, and for the last call, are there any, you look at your review sheet, if there's anything there you still have questions about, this would be a good time.
I have a question about like number 7, what exactly you mean, like what you know by.
Okay. About the principles, okay. Primarily what I'm talking about there are the questions that you add, the diagnostic questions, the who, what, when, where, plus the broader question, the more detailed questions rather, of techniques like imagery and figurative language and tone and rhythm, and you just need to generally know those. And as far as a question is concerned, or on the exam, I'm pretty sure I've included that question. Now, I'm going to give you some options. Even on the written exam, there are options. But you would need to say, take 7 of those questions, 5 to 7 of those questions, and show how, like the poem I'm going to give you in just a minute, the question of who is the speaker and who is the audience is essential to that poem. Part of that was important to the one about baseball. Who the speaker was incredibly important because he's the one who learned English. But sometimes neither are that important. Like who is speaking is just some person. Is that we don't really have any other things, and there's an audience is nobody but us. But you have to ask it because otherwise you will ignore it. So you would be able to take a poem and say, here's why the speaker is so important. Here's why the audience, and your choice of poems. Maybe it's 2 poems. And then what about the setting and circumstance? Why is that important to this poem? And what are we supposed to look for when we analyze poetry analysis? Well, we look for word choice. We look for anything that stands out. And here's an example. So that's what I mean by that. Danielle, I mean generally, what do you already know about the techniques that you're looking for and the things you have to address? And here's how that's important. Yeah.
With that, do you want us to know certain poems that we've gone over?
Yes, but your choice. That's why the other day, and I think you were here, I listed the poems that we've done in class. You can pick any of them. I just have to know it because otherwise I won't know if you're right or not. And so you just show how, and we're going to do another one today to show how the language of this poem, and like there's a shift in this poem. That's a technique. That's something to look for. Are there shifts in the poem? Well, there's a big one in this poem, and it happens to be a sonnet, and it happens exactly where you would expect it to happen, at that 8th line. And so you could use that as an example. And the language in the first half of the poem is different from the language in the second half of the poem, even though they're being spoken by the same person. Something changed. What changed? That's the kind of question you have to ask any poem. Are there changes there? Here's an example in this poem. What about diction? Here's an example. The kid used all this lingo, baseball lingo, and he was very informal and because he's just a kid. If he'd spoken with elevated language, that wouldn't sound like a kid. So those are some ways that you can address that. Yes.
Like when you say you want us to know the poems, are we going to have them printed out on the test?
No, you pick in advance. These are the poems that I'd like to kind of look over before the test tomorrow. You don't have to pick one poem. You can pick 2 or 3, but these are poems that would be great in discussing diction or syntax or, those questions that I'm talking about, certain literary devices. You have to look for irony. This is why irony is so important. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Yes.
Do we have to know anything about the characteristics of realism?
No, because we haven't done that yet. That's why it's not on here, is it?
No, but like when we studied like romanticism.
Yeah, I know. And I've even said that I would have given you Huck Finn, and I hadn't done that. Unless you really, really want Huck, I can give it to you Thursday if you want to go ahead and get started. Yeah, we just didn't get that far yet. Yeah, Jacob.
For number 9, would like one of the questions be like list and explain the characteristics of romanticism?
I don't think I'm gonna ask it that way, that's kind of too simple. All you have to do is list those 9 qualities. If I asked it like, yeah, give me those 9 qualities, or give me a certain number of them, 6, and show how specific poems relate to that. But that's also what I've done in number 2, I'm sorry, not 2, but number 5, where I've picked out some of those traits, which is nature, social justice, and the past. Those are things romantics were particularly concerned about. So I've narrowed those 9 down to 3 there, but there may be others that you could use. And if these overlap, that's fine with me. And your answer, like number 6 and number 9 overlap. That's fine, that's great. You can study them at the same time. Yeah.
So like when you're talking about social criticism in the crucible, are you just talking about like people getting caught up in hysteria?
Well, that's one aspect of the social criticism. I know we didn't spend a lot of time with the book, but what else is he criticizing? He's criticizing the church. Look at those guys. They were terrible. They wanted to find witches. Oh boy, we got some witches now. I can put that to use. I learned that in seminary, and I can show how much I know about witches. That seemed like the attitude of that guy Hale. And so the church, why isn't Paris preaching love your neighbor? These guys hated each other, and the witch trials just exposed that. They didn't have a chance to I mean, Putnam hated Giles Corey because he felt like and Proctor, because he felt like Proctor had taken over some land that belonged to him. But he didn't have an opportunity until the witch trial came up to get that land. Now he can call him a witch and he's got the land. What are the church, in the church preaching anything? So it's a criticism of it's a criticism of the courts. You had to prove you weren't a witch. Yeah, just prove you weren't a witch. But you can't use anything we can see, because only evidence admissible here is things we can't see. Are you kidding me? By the way, it's 100 years before the Bill of Rights. Like, this is 1692, Bill of Rights around 1794, 1793. There were no religious freedom. There was no freedom of the press. I mean, it wasn't written down anywhere. And so you didn't have the right, apparently, by a fair trial in Salem, because these weren't fair. So that's several things that you could talk about. And I know we didn't study that as well as we have the other books, but I think it's a fairly simple book. Yeah.
2 questions. Are we gonna get that, we won't get that essay back before the meeting?
I just have one left. If on your way out of here, I can't remember who it is. Jacob, I think I was working on Kieran, and I don't see him. So Jacob I usually happen to be on the bottom. So you're the next one I have to do. But if you want it on the way out, I give it to you. I just like to be fair and give it all at once. But you're welcome to have it. I haven't entered them yet, but I do have the grades.
And then for romanticism, do they like the past or they don't like it?
They like it, and they idealize it. They romanticize it. You can't define the word with the word, but if you understand romanticize, meaning idealize, like they look back at the past and think, oh, that was great. Well, that was because it was 200 years ago, the Middle Ages say, 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, nobody's alive. So you can make the past look any way you want to. That's why they like the past, because they don't have to be realistic. You know, they can make the past look as great as they want it to, or as bad as they want it to. All right, yes.
What do you mean by redemption in the House of Seven Gables?
I love redemption stories. And redemption stories is when the bad guy changes. Scrooge is, to me, one of the best redemption stories ever written. You know, he changes, wakes up next day, he's a new man. They don't change that radically, but think about the house and the name of Pynchon. It changes radically. You know, the house, they get rid of it. The name, now it's different. Relationships are restored. remember, even the house started looking a little better, but after the death of the last pension, that mattered apparently, people's relationships got better, and the two families were no longer at odds. They actually married each other, and Phoebe and Holgrave. So now the two families have merged into one. That relationship that has been healed or redeemed, bought back. That's what redeemed means. Like, you never actually been in a pawn shop, but I know that's what you do. If you give something at a pawn shop and you want it back, you redeem it. You pay for it, you get your thing back, whatever it was. And that's what redemption is, and it's with humans. Like, the person is now restored, and so I think that's something to look for in any work of literature. Is people are redeemed, is restored. I think the best works do that. Anything else? Well, yes.
In number 6, or the one about reading that you told us to add, what exactly, do we need to know about that?
I haven't included reading here, have I? I hope I didn't ask you a question about it. But I'll have to look at it. Yeah, it is the classics. There it is. Sorry, I didn't highlight it. What would you need to know? Well, what is a classic? Why is it important to read classics? It's according to what Thoreau said. Those two primarily. What is it? Why should we read them? And he talks about. Remember, he talks about the superiority of the written word. Why does he think the written word is so great? What makes it superior to the spoken word? And he loves words. He thinks words are really valuable, and so that's why we talked about Proverbs, where he talks in Proverbs about words said in season, how sweet it is. That's what he says. So you could discuss those things, just the value of words. Yes.
How would you describe social justice?
Well, it's the same thing we're dealing with, in our country the past 2 years, social justice. And in terms of what were the problems in England during the Romantic period, it was, remember Jerusalem, the poem Jerusalem, the mills, what was the word? Yeah, but what do you call those mills? The dark mills. Anyway, he's talking about the Industrial Revolution, just vaguely. Yeah, and then he was talking about chimney sweepers. He's talking about 1803, London 1803, how the manners were terrible. There was corruption in the family, and in the church, in the military, in literature. Sounds like we're kind of facing a lot of that too. That's a social issue. And what was the solution? Remember, it's a sonnet. That was a sonnet, and sonnets always provide solutions. And the sonnet would be Milton. What has Milton got to offer? Well, the poem talks about that too. And that was just 2 or 3 poems. There's probably 1 or 2 more in there you could probably throw in. Anything else? Yeah.
What do you mean by, the theme of the past and all King's Men? What would be an example of that?
Well, think about Jack's dad. He never, that was the past. He didn't have anything to do with getting born, and his dad ignored him. Think about Willie's past, growing up an idealist, and then he gets cheated when he's running for office, and his whole life now is being dictated by that event. He's a new man because somebody cheated him when he was running for governor. Think about Cass Master. That took place 80 years before the story, and yet a large chunk of the book, it deals with something that happens in the past. So why did the writer do that? Why did the writer spend a whole chapter with the past? and you can probably answer that, because you know now how Cass Mastering represents a lot of the people currently living in the book. Those just top of my head come to mind. You know, think about Jack, he's always thinking about Anne on that raft out in the bay. And he keeps going back to that 2 or 3 times, and he's in love with her, and yet now he's a grown man, and he never dealt with that. So he's always dealing with the past. His dad, his girlfriend, whatever you want to call her. So all those things deal with the past. Anything else? Well, to finish this up, I would like to hand you a poem that we don't have time to do too well, but there are even some questions here. You don't have to answer the questions, but mark the poem for diction, syntax, any of those questions, those diagnostic questions. This guy is a contemporary of Shakespeare. For your, look at the dates. I don't know if that matters, but everything you know about an author helps. Can't hurt. So read it in 5 minutes. And look at your shirt, your sweatshirt. I know we have a Clemson person here. Read it and see what you can come up with. Shouldn't take you long to figure out what kind of poem it is. You can look at the questions, they're helpful, but you don't have to write them out. You could have hopefully figured out those things without somebody asking them. You know to look for that. Sure, I don't see. Isabella. All right, we have about 10 minutes. Anybody want to get us started? Anything you noticed about it, the questions, speaker, anything? That's what this is about. Noah, why don't you start? Anything about it, anything you noticed, any answer to any of the questions?
Well, I noticed that there was an octave possessed in it.
Did you notice, and I kinda gave you a heads up, there's a shift, what shifts?
It shifts from more like sorrow to like almost grieving as he's like dying.
Okay, definitely somebody or something is dying. Jonathan, what can you add to that? Who's dying? What's dying?
Seems like the guy who loves.
Yes. The love is dying. So somebody needs to tell us who the speaker in the audience is, because that'll tell us something, yeah.
Well, I was like thinking like the speaker would like be the woman. So like the woman is like telling like her husband that like, or is like describing the scene where like her husband's like love dying.
All right, if you say it the other way around, I think it works either way. I always picture it as the male because of the author. So somebody is telling who is that person who's in love talking?
Spouse.
What?
The spouse.
All right, the other lover, the girlfriend, or whatever it is. So what's the difference in the first part? You mentioned grieving and sorrow. Layla, what can you say? Anything else about the first and the second part? We've already said the love is dying, so it's a love gone wrong song, whatever. It's about love didn't work out.
Yeah, it kind of sounded like they were getting divorced in like the first part. It's like they don't really care and they're just like, oh, let's cancel our vows, like I'm done with you. And then the second part is like more passionate.
Okay, how do you explain the change? The first part, the person correctly. What are some other words to describe the attitude in the first part? See, this is where the diction thing comes in. What does he say? How does he say it? And what is the attitude that's conveyed by it? Ever had a breakup with anybody? How did, I mean, if you've ever seen a movie, read a book, had it, personal experience, this is a universal thing, yes.
It's like you can't really see his emotions in the first part, and like they're a lot more serious and like not really going deeper into it. And the second,
You mean less serious or more serious?
well, I guess less serious in the fact that like they're not really showing their emotions as much and just being like straightforward.
Right.
And then the second, you kind of see like how they really feel
So
about it.
you're telling me in the first part he's not being honest. Why would he not be honest? I would just say it's a he. Why is he not honest? What's he upset about? Or what's he not being honest about? John, what's he not being honest? If the second part expresses his real feelings, then what's he feeling in the first part that he's not honest about?
Well, he's saying that there is no way to fix it. He's kind of like, well, let's just throw in the towel.
Yes.
But really, he thinks there's still hope and really wants to give it another go.
Yes. And can anybody express another way, maybe Madeline, what the attitude in the first one is? Can you think of other words that describe that attitude?
In the author,
Yes.
I said he was kind of like, at first he was like, good riddance, goodbye, I don't really care about you. But then in the sesta, became more serious and more sad.
Okay. Right. Did you notice the use of yeah. Wait.
Oh, I was gonna say, it sounded like he was talking to his spouse in the first one, and
Yeah.
then in the second, he's like talking to himself. 'Cause he's.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and that love, that he's the one that wants to be resuscitated and love again. If you notice the use of cliches in the first part. Now let's kiss and part. I have done. You got no more of me. Shake hands. He wants to shake hands about it. Let's just shake hands. Next time we see each other, we won't show one iota, one bit of feelings toward each other. You think he's not being honest, so he's exaggerating, right? How do you know when he says this, I am glad, yea, glad with all my heart? How do you know that's a lie? Daniel, how do you know that's a lie? I am glad, yea, glad with all my heart. Thus so cleanly done.
It kind of sounds sarcastic, like, oh, I'm glad, I'm very glad.
So what about it makes it sound sarcastic?
He like repeats it.
Yes. when you have to repeat it, it's like, yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm really glad. He had to say it again. A couple had to hear it. Yeah, that's what I am. When you're not really that way at all. I like the one about shaking hands. Yeah, we'll just shake hands. I'm no big. You hadn't hurt me. Me hurt me. Nobody can hurt me. I can just picture that attitude. Yeah. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, good. No big deal. No problem. When he doesn't mean that at all, but he's just putting up a false front. And then at the end, what makes it more serious? In the end, he's expressing his real feelings. Eloise, what kind of language you see in the second part?
He like personifies the emotions.
Yes.
And like the way that he describes them, like makes you like see his like true thoughts of how he really is.
Right. I would say more poetic, but that's not a good way. That's a bad word to use because it's poetry. But you know what I mean? Traditionally poetic, using personification. The first one is more like almost like a conversation, more casual. The second one is more formal, and he's really serious about this. And she could change this whole thing if she would. That would be another example of a poem you could use to explain how the language is so important and how the language expresses a false feeling at the beginning, just acting like you're serious, and then a more serious, because it even slows down, the lines become longer. Somebody, I think it was Tyler, pointed out the first part had a lot of commas, have you ever been angry at anybody? And you're trying to talk to them, and sometimes your breath, you can't, your heart's beating, you're trying to, you say, but it comes out in little chunks instead of a long thing. It comes, and then you get your breath, you say it, something else, and that's almost, to me, that's the first part. He's really kind of simmering, but he's saying all these things real quickly. And I won't see you again until Thursday, and probably next door. Has she told you that? Okay, well, it's next door. We're going to meet in her room. And don't forget to look at the list, what group you're in. It's alphabetical. 8:30, 10:30, and 12:45. So let me give these. And you go ahead. You get it, you go ahead. And Jacob, I still got to finish yours and Kieran. I think you're going to the forum.
Are we going straight there?
I don't know. Why don't you check in with your teacher? I don't want to tell you.
Wait, this is the crucible lesson?
Yeah, check the paper. Oh, like flip.
I use that rubric because it's the same rubric.
Oh,
Unless they went, you're good. Jonathan, I got one for you here. Will's not here.